Hi guys, my name's Jack. Welcome back to the Red Path for another video. Today, Dara and I will be going through our thoughts on a more abstract level about the reveals we've had for World Eaters so far. Um, Hi guys, welcome back to the video. um, Dara is joining me today as we're just going to take a bit of a deep dive into sort of initial thoughts on competitive play for the World Eaters book, the forthcoming World Eaters book. How you doing?
Good. Excited to take a bit more of a deep dive and personal take on all these new rules and reveals. It's going to be a good one, I think.
Excellent. So I think we're going to start with playstyle, just general playstyle. What sort of vibes you're getting from the book? How you think? Because obviously we talked about various different playstyles in the past sort of 6 months. We've talked about like sort of successive waves of pressure list builds. So like having wave one really fast stuff with frenzy, wave two like possessed and fast stuff without frenzy, wave three your stompy stuff with like terminators maybe. And then we've talked about how we've talked repeatedly about go turns, cowabunga turns, all of that stuff, which is basically turn three or four generally, where you just send everything in at once and get loads of points, like primary, secondary, all of that, all at the same time, and that generally decides how your game goes. Um, so yeah, what are your initial thoughts on the way the book is looking like it will shape up in terms of playstyle?
I think it's a pretty interesting one because I think there are options for different playstyles to be accommodated in this book. I think you can still build to do the go turn build kind of a thing where it's like you maybe kind of spend the first couple of turns setting up and then have a very potent turn three or turn four, like you said, and rack up. You could be racking up a lot of blood tide points or something like that. You're probably not racking up as much victory points as you would
Yeah,
have been in previous times, simply because of how our secondaries work now, like you said, which is a really good point. And I think the book can lean more towards a sort of consistent pressure build being something that might be more competitive, which is great because that's basically what I've been playing for the last 2 years is consistent pressure builds. So I'm really happy about that playstyle. I do think there's also scope for extremely potent alpha strike lists if that's what you want to do, especially if the rumors with Invocatus are true. So you could have like two squads of 8 bound moving up, a drop pod coming in with Berserkers and Angron flying up in turn one.
yeah,
So there is like a really powerful alpha strike build, which, as we know, can be extremely effective, but generally will end up being a gatekeeper 3 and 2, 4 and 1 kind of
it's
list.
swingy, isn't it? You have to go
It's
first.
very swingy. You need to go first, and you need to hope that your opponent doesn't screen you out too aggressively. But in games that it will work,
It'll work
it'll
really
work really
well.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah, but I guess what you want is something a little bit more consistent and reliable. And personally, so my competitive take on the book right now, from what we've seen, obviously there's a lot still yet to come, but I would be leaning towards the slow burn, consistent pressure
yeah,
style list, the staggered waves, which, like I said, I've run it for a long time already to relatively good success. And I can see that this book is going to accommodate my style extremely well
nicely. Yeah,
going forward. So I think it's going to be composed, like you said, of like a sort of fast wave one, which will kind of fizzle out over turns one and two. Then there's like probably a sort of an annoyance in maybe turn two or three, like nothing really extreme,
yeah,
but something will go in, and then turns four, three, four onwards. That's when the boogie zone really kind of kicks up. So like there will still be like a go turn for want of a better word,
yeah.
but it will be less of a go turn than previous kind of, we'll say, styles that we might have done. Um, and hey, there might be a kind of late game resurgence if I'm building in with Angron or something
Yeah.
like that, which is in my initial list, just because like I need to run Angron in a tournament early on just to get it out of my system. Because like I'll never forgive myself if I
what
don't, and I know if I don't do it early, I won't do it at all,
what
right?
happens if
So
you
I'm
what
just gonna
hap-
do.
So what happens if you don't get it out of your system, and what if you get addicted to Angron? I
Well,
guess.
I mean, like if I get addicted to Angron, I will just run him into the ground until he stops being good, and something happens that pulls my attention other ways. But yeah, I think the long and short of it is that the book will be great for a lot of stats, right? Like we said, but the really really competitive is going to be that kind of like pressure cooker, I think, where things get more and more and more and more until like
Yeah.
they really spill over. And I know a lot of people in the Discord are big proponents of a really potent alpha strike. I get that, like, because you like the book will apparently accommodate the ability to push an awful lot of units into your opponent's face in turn one, and that is like really really good in some ways. But I think the core problem there, why that's not going to work, it's there's a few reasons, but like none of our units are really durable enough to be able to weather a smackback, right? Which means that screening is going to be a big problem. Screening wouldn't be a problem if we had units like the current Red Butcher's Terminator builds, where they're really really hard to shift. But like realistically, like what are you putting in turn one? It's going to be 8-bound Angron and a drop pod full of potentially berserkers or something like that, right? So it's not going to weather the firestorm to hit it back. So you can easily win 2 or 3 games at a tournament with that build. But I think once you start hitting the top 10 players in the event, they're just going to see that list and be like, well, this is really easy to just push you back from. It's the same problem we had with the Warp Talon Alpha Strikes before with the Apoplectic Frenzy. It's kind of why I stopped running them, because I was getting to that level at an event where people just shut it down, and like it once that happens, you're like, well, I don't have a plan B.
It feels really bad when people counter it, right? So it is a
yeah.
very all or nothing play. Like, if it comes off, it feels great because you destroy the world on turn one, and it's like, cool, I'm the best at Warhammer ever. But
but you're not, though. Like, that's the thing.
if you screen it, and so if someone screens it and they stop it, then you're like, well, I've lost the game.
Yeah.
Because my whole list is built for me going first, and if I don't go first, I've lost the game. Probably. I mean, it's not quite that black and white, but like you know what I mean. Like,
you can play around it, but you're immediately playing from a deficit.
Yeah. And it feels worse to play because your army isn't doing what it's designed to do, which just feels bad. Which I'm not here for that. So.
And to be honest, like I played enough games with that Alpha Strike build with the Warp Talons and stuff, and I did not enjoy making my opponent feel the way they did when I did get it off and I just bodied them in turn one, because they're like, oh, that sucks, and I'm like, sorry, man, it does.
Yeah.
Like it's not a great feeling to win, and that just depends on how much you care about wanting to have fun at a tournament rather than necessarily getting the W's. But like personally, my vibe is more to be like, I want to win, and I want my opponent to be like, you deserve that win, you know? Exactly.
Game,
right? Which I think you will get from the pressure cooker build, but there's the thumbnail. It can be like my head inside a pressure cooker or something like that, right? But that's not to say that there isn't an Alpha Strike element in that build, though. Would you agree?
I would agree. I think you can have an Alpha Strike capability as part of like a concert as your first wave, right? Like that's your first wave, and then you have other stuff. So it's about how many points you devote to an Alpha Strike. So like,
that's exactly it. Exactly.
I've seen people talking about the thing at the moment is people talking about because I think it's semi-confirmed. I need to check the tapes, but it's semi-confirmed that 8-bounder core, because I think they get the reroll ones to wounds off Khorne in the video, but I need to go back and check that. So don't quote me on that. Grain of salt. I don't know what the usual fucking phrases are around that. So I think they have core, which makes them eligible for Invocatus' pre-game move, which means 11 inches pre-game, then 11 inches in-game, because Invocatus go with them. So that is two, and at the moment the build that people are talking about is two big units of 8 bounds, so 2 units of 5 or 6. I'm leaning towards 5 rather than 6 because of blast and coherency, making 5 just better, I think. So that's 200 points per unit of 8 bounds. So that's 400 points plus 160 for Invocatus. And you have to assume you're going to lose those on the hit back. That's a quarter of your army, over a quarter of your army, that is probably not scoring that many points, because if we look at our secondaries, our good secondaries that we're going to take, Blood for the Blood God is capped at 4, which is, so you don't want to kill too much in one turn, which is why I'm leaning away from Alpha Strike and like go turn, that kind of build anyway, because you don't want to kill too much in one turn, because you overcap Blood for Blood, which is a good secondary, and I think we'll probably
things become redundant.
Because it's what we play game score points, which so people are going to take it. It also sucks for things like Blood God Stew, because if you get them turn 1, they're not spread out onto objectives, right? And as soon as you say you have Blood God Stew, people are probably just going to stand off objectives in turn 1, because there is no benefit to standing on them in turn 1. especially against better players.
Same as like how people used to play against the Long War before.
Yes, well, and people still do, I think. But yeah, so I think 560 points to get what, maybe 5 points,
This is the question, right? Yeah,
and then
I think
yeah,
you've nailed it exactly there. It's like if you want to do this alpha strike, right? You have to ask yourself why. Like, what's in it for you to do this alpha strike? And you
yeah,
put it really succinctly there, where it's like, how many points are you actually getting, and how many of your army's points are you
yeah.
dedicating towards that
I mean,
resource, right?
I would say it's not necessarily quite that simple because the Alpha
It's
Strike
not,
has
yeah.
values beyond just the raw victory points you score. Because obviously, like, there's a chance that they don't clear all of that out, or they devote slightly less than they need to clear all that out, and then you have a 1 inch, a 1 CP 6 inch Iraq on one of the like 1 8 bound into something in their turn, which could really fuck them. Um, but like, and there's points to be made about like pinning them into deployment zone on certain maps. That would be good for pinning them in and shut down their scoring ability in turn two, that kind of thing, and might change the whole game back. So there's points to be made about that, and that's kind of how I used to play the Warp Talon Alpha Strike that we were talking about. So back before Nephilim, when we had all the CP and we could do 3 units Warp Talons up. So there is it's obviously not quite as simple as like 560 points for 5 victory points, maybe.
But that is the core question that you need to be asking yourself, right? So it's like, how much points do you want to okay, let's talk about like this pressure cooker build, right? So you want to set aside some points for an alpha strike anyway, because like, so looking at my current build, right, the one that I'm taking to LVO, that those points are set aside for, we'll say, the 6 possessed that I send forward, because it's kind of like they'll go in, they'll fucking, blend some shit, and then it's whatever. But like the way you're saying it is like, Invocatus, 2 units of 8 bound, like that's a lot of points. As we said, it's more than a quarter of your army, right? So the question is, what are you trying to get from this alpha strike? Because like we've established, you can't really get that many victory points, and unless you're playing a really silly opponent or somebody's playing knights that doesn't really have the ability to screen, you're not really making your points back either in terms of like the trade-off, right? So are there units that can effectively get you the same return for less of an investment?
Yeah.
And I think there is.
I think
So I think you have to ask yourself like what that is. So one thing that obviously it's not initially going to be legal because of Forge World being silly unless there's a day one FAQ, but I am really interested in bringing a Dreadclaw full of jackals. I think that is going to be a serious play. Because as far as we can tell from the stratagem wording, it says that a unit that has an icon can 3d6 charge, and jackals have an icon.
I'm unconvinced by that at the moment.
You are unconvinced, or you are convinced?
It feels weird that they would get Icon of Wrath. I know the wording lines up at the moment from what we've seen, but it just feels a bit weird to me. So I'm not 100% sold on that.
I'm not. I don't think it's so weird, right? Okay. Because in my mind, it's like it's very thematic, right? Because you send this rabble in early doors to 3d6. Hey man, they've put weirder things in Legion drop pods.
Okay. So
okay, my concept is this, right? To launch them in, because okay, so this is my problem. We don't really know what the Jackal data sheet is yet, but we know that we know that they can probably blend like a guard equivalent screen.
Yeah, probably that'll be good for clearing screens. I think. Your point,
which is like in my mind is like if they can run in, they can blend a screen. So you're getting is it Blood for the Blood God secondary or whatever?
Yeah, you'll get 1 point for killing like an infantry squad,
and you'll get a tithe point as well.
And you'll get a tithe point, and then another one when your jackals die.
If you're lucky, you might land on an objective. You'll get another one for when the jackals die, and then if the pod makes a charge, it might do something. It might not, but you'll get 2 more when the pod dies, and the pod has to die. Like they have to kill it as well, right?
Because it does more with the movement phase and shit like that. So
that's like 285 points for nothing.
185.
Sorry, 185. Yeah, 185 for
It's 190 with the icon.
Yes,
75 points for the jackals, 115 for the pod.
In and around 200, let's say, because we don't know if we want to give the jackals the skull masher or the two-handed chainsword, right? Which we maybe do, but like that's not bad in terms of like just 200 points fired in for your turn one. Has to be dealt with. Is it going to be particularly hard? No. However, it might get you the crucial blood tide points that you need to kick off that survivability buff in the first turn, right? Which is big.
Okay.
So I think having them in and like that could be one push for the pressure cooker builds because you're not
Yeah.
overcommitting to the
Yeah.
alpha strike,
So
but you are giving people something to think about.
I think that potentially, well, starts us on like list building considerations. Then we talked about playstyle a bit. We think
Yes.
probably not alpha strike and probably not even just one big turn. Like even if it's later in the game, probably not one big turn. Although we will get more powerful as the game goes on, just because of how we get to layer the buffs from Bloodtide. I think we want to be. It wants to be. I guess what we're talking about is like it's going to be quite an intensive trading game. To get the most out of World Eaters, you're going to have to trade very carefully and very precisely, ideally onto objectives at all times.
Yeah, because you want to be getting those buffs up as well, right?
Yeah, because you want to be marrying up, getting blood type points in the most efficient way possible, getting points in the most efficient way possible. So that is Blood God Stew and Blood for Blood God probably are two secondaries that are going to take quite a lot. I'm anticipating, not having played them, so pitch
I agree.
salt
Yep.
because I haven't played with them, so and I do a lot of that kind of thing on like feel on how easy they are to score. And how fun they are to play, to be honest, like how much I have to think about scoring them, because if I have to think less about scoring them, then I score them better generally,
Okay.
which is weird. So I think taking those two, being able to, thinking about ways to maximize that as well as blood type generation, is going to be key to running World Eaters successfully, and that is so that there's kind of the incentivization between MSU and like bigger squads, and I think that leads into our list building styles quite nicely. Cause
Yeah, so this is going to be the second kind of part of the video, which is building the list, right? And I think like what you've just said there really kind of highlights like the example that we discussed there, where it's like you've got your 8-bound initial rush versus your jackal in the pod initial rush, right? Because one of those is an awful lot more efficient at beginning that power up of your army, at getting those early door victory points than the other. Because the other one, while it sounds great to fire that many 8-bound into your enemy's lines in the first turn, and it is great,
it will
like,
kill
but
a lot of stuff. Like
it will, but does it need to? Is
Yeah,
the question.
exactly.
You know, how much do you really get? Like, you have to ask yourself, like, as much as we all love getting into the enemy and blending them, like, that's not necessarily like what you're trying to achieve the whole time, right?
Got
So
consistent blending, not high intensity
exactly,
blending.
yeah, yeah, you got to have that long term blend. It's the slow cooker,
It's
that
the-
pressure, you know,
Fucking
it's
hell.
the slow cooker.
That is the
All
nightmare, isn't
good
it?
things take time. Yeah, slow cooker, world eater slow cooker recipes.
Oh, okay.
There's such a good pun there. Okay, but yeah, okay.
There's
So
good
list
build-
building, list building
list building.
is
Yeah, before we get off track.
we've established that I think both of us are on the pressure build,
Slow
right?
build. Yeah,
So
slow burn.
I think the first thing, now I might be wrong here, but the first thing that you're asking yourself when you're going into list construction is, am I bringing Angron or not? Because I think that informs an awful lot of the rest of the build, even in the pressure build. Would you agree?
Yes, I think I do. Angron, if you bring him, is probably in your first wave, right? And I think it is really terrain dependent. You bring him if you can hide him.
I think it's terrain dependent, but I think the terrain dependency is what influences whether or not he is in the first wave or not, if that makes sense.
True.
Because if terrain is good, I don't see him being in my first wave, unless it's like quarters deployment and my opponent is deployed badly. Like Angron is probably the last thing going down in my deployment.
Yes. Well,
but
I don't know. I think so. Obviously, a lot of my like more competitive events are UKTC. In my head, he only fits behind the big L. In UKTC.
He fits behind the big L in UKTC. Nothing else though.
One flank, or it's right at the back of your deployment zone. So, in some games, if the opponent deploys badly, maybe. But like against good opponents, they're gonna see Angron only hides in that big L. That's where Angron's going. So I might as well just put him down first, because we both know where he's going, kind of thing. I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's that black and white, to be honest.
Yeah, there is nuance there for sure. About like if he puts all his big guns on one flank, then I'm just gonna put him on the other flank. And
But like, I think that like that stuff is important, but like I suppose we are diverging a little bit from the build, because like so I personally think that is the thing, right? Is like, are you putting Angron in the list? Because that will inform your other HQ choices massively. So I think
for sure.
Right. So it's either a yes or a no. I feel like initially you're leaning on the no and I'm leaning on the yes. Would I be correct in saying that?
Not necessarily, because as we've talked more and as we've talked discussed in the Discord a bit more, I initially, when Invocatus come out, and I mean you can watch the videos that we did on Invocatus, we were high as a kite on Invocatus.
Yeah.
Him being pushed to hell because pre-game moves on core units, banging, plus 2 inch move, excellent. I am actually, I'm thinking that he's not an auto take anymore because I just doing that maths and working out the cost of like 2 squads of 8 pounds for the Alpha Strike and then looking at like
Hmm.
points return and then what you lose is like I'm not sure it's
Basically
worth
everything
it.
we just talked about,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
I'm not sure
yeah.
it's worth it. And then it's like okay, but if you've got him in for the Warlord trait, then like
You don't have Angron.
what you're using the Warlord trait on as well. Like
Mm,
if you're not using it on big
yeah.
squads of 8 bound, like you're using it on like fucking Hellbrutes or Berserkers or Contemptors or Terminators if you're mad. Um,
Yeah,
and like
yeah.
that doesn't feel worth it. So maybe you do take Imbricatus because he's still got something which we don't otherwise really have access to, which is ignoring inbounds on his weapon. Maybe you do take him for that, but maybe you don't need the Warlord trait anymore because I don't think it has the value that we initially thought it has because 8 bound are really fucking expensive according to the unconfirmed points leaks, which is 40 points a model. That's too much for me to
Yeah,
like
I agree.
want to invest in them. If they come down to like 30, 35, I think 30 would be way pushed, but 35, I think there's a
They
discussion to be had
feel
there.
I just feel like you're paying for the reserves rule, which
Yeah,
you don't always use.
which is
And
like
if you're building in with Invocatus, you're never using it,
yeah,
you
well,
know?
exactly.
So it's like, okay, and you don't get that return back, which I
And
think is the big
yeah,
thing.
Bloodsin just
Yeah.
it doesn't feel good. Like
It doesn't feel great.
it
No,
because
it doesn't
it's a
feel
nine
great.
inch charge or an 8 inch charge if you get the tithe
If you
ability
get
off early.
really lucky, it's an 8-inch
Yeah,
charge.
if you get the tithe ability off early, then it's an 8 inch
Yeah.
charge. But like
I don't like it as
that's
an
not
ability.
good. So I
Yeah,
hate
I
relying
think,
on 9 inch charge, and as you say, you're paying for it, which
yeah, exactly.
and it's
Yeah.
just, I don't think it is that good a rule.
So for me, the Invocatus build isn't really as hot as I previously
No.
thought. Now, I did play around with the concept of running a Hellbrute up the board in turn
Yeah.
one because he can benefit from that, or a Contemptor, which is an idea too because there's a lot of funny stratagems and
They
abilities
move
that proc off core.
and they move faster. Contemptors, so they move 8 inches
Exactly,
faster.
yeah, yeah. Both of them are decent. Both of them are probably getting there.
Uh,
Well, the Hellbrute isn't really
no.
guaranteed, but the
I mean,
Contemptor
the
is
Contemptor
probably
is
getting
more
there.
guaranteed because he'll be
Yeah,
doing 20, and the furthest between deployment zones is 24. So
yeah, and it's a cheap unit which you could launch up there, right?
yeah,
So I think if I wasn't bringing Angron, I would be probably taking Invocatus, and the way I would do it is like a unit like a Hellbrute, and then like maybe a unit of 8 bound. But it still feels bad in
still
my opinion
very
because it's a
expensive.
lot of points.
Yeah.
It's
So
still yeah, and I just think against smart opponents, you're not going to get that return.
yeah, because
So I don't think
that's the thing, isn't it?
yeah.
Against
Yeah.
smart opponents, people who screen it who have played World Eaters at all in the past will know. Don't
Mm.
let the 8 bound who are pre-game moving get into my like alpha unit. So like my block of Blight Lord Terminators or my I don't know block of fucking I don't know anymore what the alpha units are for other armies. Blight Lord Terminators are the ones I played recently. I guess like I saw Paragon Warsuit lists.
Court to the Archon or
Yeah, like
something, or
yeah,
yeah.
like you know your big death like Chaos Terminators then your big Death Star units, even though they're fucking
Mm.
going away, aren't they? Like you're possessed. Let's go with possessed. You're possessed with
You
black.
got there eventually,
Yeah, I
Jack. You
did
got
get there
there.
eventually. They're, they're not going to let you. A good player
Yeah,
is
yeah.
not going to let you.
I think the Invocatus build is going to be that like day one copy paste build that everyone's going to run, and then very quickly people are going to be like,
I played
this has stopped.
before. Yeah, just
This
fucking
has stopped
screen it,
working
yeah.
for me, right? And then they'll pivot, which is probably when things get a little bit more
See,
interesting. But I think
yeah.
that we've already gotten to the stage where we've pivoted, at least you and me
Yeah.
anyway.
I
And I think this quality kind of pressure build is actually the long-term investment, in my opinion.
yeah. I would agree. Obviously, if you take Angron, we're expecting you're not going to be able to take Invocatus Warlord trait. I don't think that necessarily rules out taking Invocatus because, as I say, he ignores involves and is quite a bit of a beat stick in his own right.
In my opinion, though, it's just better to take a Juggernaut Lord.
Yeah, but
I think.
Juggernaut Lord doesn't ignore impulse saves.
True.
It makes him quite a nice character hunter, and into certain armies that have loads of impulse saves, he will be pretty nice.
Yeah, it is one of those things. When you don't have him, you'll miss him. When you
Yeah.
do have him, you don't notice it.
So I'm
Classic.
like, yeah. I mean, I'm not a no on Angron, and as you said in a previous video, possibly, or maybe this one, because who knows anymore. Like you want to take him at least once. With a big,
Yeah.
like centerpiece model, you want to take him once. He will be fun to run, and he is not the worst thing competitively. And as we said in the previous video, there are plays around his res mechanic. that it obviously that isn't just spamming it, because spamming it I don't think is the way to do it. Although you
Yeah,
can, and it is funny that you can,
yeah.
not a
Doesn't mean
competitive
you
player.
should.
Too expensive, way too
Yeah,
expensive to like
yeah.
just cycle through points. Um,
So okay, we've established that like in this pressure build, it's either a yes or a no for Angron, and if it's a no, you're potentially bringing in Vicadis or Juggernaut Lord. I feel is another pretty good pick in
yeah,
this.
he's way cheaper, and with the he still has the move aura, which is honestly
Yeah.
probably the more valuable part, although the bit with the like greatest longevity of the M card to state sheet.
Mm. So like my first list has Angron and a Juggernaut Lord in it, just for the movement buff as well, because I think the movement buff in the pressure list is really important for
Yes.
positioning,
Yeah.
initial positioning anyway. And I think if you have the points, the third thing that you maybe want from your HQ slot is a blender character, probably a Master of Executions. If you have the points, Khorne. We don't really know what the Demon Prince is looking like yet, but he could be a contender as well. So I think you kind of want that like that sort of like blender boy who can just go around and be like,
Uh,
I'm doing business
that
by myself.
like that might be a Juggernaut Lord with the fucking Berserker
Exactly, with the
Glaive,
Berserker
like
glaive.
with
Yeah, yeah,
triple
yeah.
exploding sixes by the time you get the Blood Tithe ability off,
Exactly.
which
Yeah.
is
So
funny.
I think the question is then we're going to move into the troop slot, right? And it's the thing that you've kind of touched on is obviously we want berserkers and we probably want some jackals as well.
I
But
reckon,
here,
yeah, once two squads Jackals and then just Berserkers.
yeah. So like you might be doing the jackal play that I'm talking about with the Dreadclaw, or you might just be having them in the back or something, doing actions, blah
Yeah,
blah blah, whatever. We don't really care. The thing is the berserkers, right? This is where it's really interesting for me. Like not so much like are you bringing berserkers or not, but how are you
and
bringing those
what
berserkers?
configuration, right?
What configuration, right? Because we've touched on it maybe in this video, previous videos, whatever. The trade-off between the abilities in the Berserker data sheet for moving after they get shot
Yeah,
versus MSU squads for generation of Blood Tide points. Going back then to if you have a bigger squad, you get more out of your abilities and buffs,
yeah,
etc., etc. Um, how's
I,
that looking for you in your list builds? Like,
right.
what's your initial thoughts behind? Like, because I've already kind of established like, yeah, in my list anyway. What I'm doing is I'm running
2 5s and an
two
8.
squads. Sorry, 4 squads of 5 and 1 squad of 8
8,
or
yeah.
10.
Okay.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
That's what I think is probably going to be. To me, it's sensible in the pressure build because
Yeah.
in maybe the earlier turns, not necessarily the first wave, but probably the second wave, what you can do is you can introduce 2 MSU squads that will probably like blend up or whatever, and then they'll be thrown away. And it's not really that big of a deal if they are, but they generate you more blood tide points. So
Yeah.
when you get into the later, more important waves, the third wave, that's when you can start introducing the bigger buffed up squads that can really become a headache.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Like
So
what's your thoughts on like how are you going to build those berserkers?
I have possibly contradictory thoughts because of all the stuff that's under consideration, right? So, like you say, we get more out buffs, so like the Fight on Death, the Mortal Wound strats, all of that stuff on bigger squads because it's still 1 CP regardless of squad size. The determining factor is if they're troops or not, so berserkers or not, basically. The blood surge ability, um, you're more likely to get more mileage out of it in big squads, I think, because at the end of the day, berserkers are looking like they're going to be marines and therefore very easy to kill. So if you shoot a unit of berserkers and only do 1 casualty, you fucked up a bit, I think. Like they're like if you're shooting them, you're probably going to kill all 5 or at least cripple the squad. So you get more mileage out of blood surge and be able to be more aggressive with blood surge if you have big squads. But on the other side of that coin is obviously MSU is better for blood type generation because they're infantry units. You kill 5 berserkers, you get a blood type point versus like so. Running infantry is the most efficient way to generate blood type, I think. And you sprinkle in a couple of vehicles that you can feed in one at a time because realistically most of your vehicles are going to die to shooting, I would expect, which is obviously only 1 phase, which means they're only getting 2, and then they're just like everything else. So, but generally, I don't know. Anyway, so and the other side of MSU for me is you can fit more eviscerators in, unless you go full 10. Like you're only getting 1 eviscerator in a squad of 8, and I think
Yeah.
they're going to be really good for 5 points because they're 2 damage. Which is something we haven't had access to in a while for berserkers, like not since power fists. And if we're not getting the -1 on the eviscerator, then that makes them better, in my opinion. So I I my early like iterations that I've been looking at, I've had four squads of five berserkers, and then two squads of jackals as my troops. I did write that meme list that had eight squads of five berserkers, which could be a thing. But yeah, so it is walking that narrow line between maximizing blood surge, maximizing strats, versus maximizing blood tithe, which is kind of like in my head. If you're maximizing blood tithe, then you're like smaller units. Although I guess this goes into what you're saying is like you have more units to do more different things in different areas of the board that will be buffed up and suddenly become threats in their own right. Because I was saying in an earlier video, I don't think Squad of Five Berserkers like it'll kill stuff, but it won't kill like hard targets in the way that it has in the past. But by the end of the game, they will be able to because they'll be all buffed up. And I think
Yep.
while you're coming at it from, you'll have a big squad end game, late game to like blend loads of shit. I'm coming at it from, I'll have multiple squads able to maybe not blend shit, but like cripple shit late game, and maybe force morale or like flip objectives, that kind of thing, and just be active in more areas of the board, I guess is my thinking. So I'm probably, shocker, still leaning towards squads of five, whereas I think you sound like you're doing squads of five for initial generation, like tide generation, and then big squads
Yeah,
for actual
like
stuff.
in my mind, it's the introduction of like a big squad in the late game,
Yeah.
alongside a possibly raising Angron is a
Yeah.
lot of kind of things to deal with
Yeah.
at the same time. But I think yeah, there's a lot of I don't think either of us are wrong there, you know, because it's really like how you're building out from that. Because if you go with loads of small 5-man squads, which is perfectly valid, they cripple everything. But then it's like, what do you pad the list with, right? Like, what's
You
doing the
do then
lifting?
need something that is a massive damage
Exactly.
dealer, right?
Yeah. So I suppose the natural question leading on from the Berserkers is the delivery mechanic, which currently, you know, without a Forge Day 1 FAQ is going to be limited to Rhinos, which I still think are
Land
exceptionally
Raiders.
valid,
Or Land
or
Raiders.
Land Raiders, yeah, which are really valid as a slingshot mechanic. Like, you know, we all know you can utilize that extra 3, but now with a Juggerlord, getting 11 inches out of a Rhino is quite potent
Yeah.
in terms of reach.
Agreed.
Yeah.
As you said, assuming no day one FAQ for Forge Worlds, Rhinos feel fine to me because like
Yep.
I've never. I went through one short phase of only running two drills, but then I've since switched back to what I feel is a more balanced one drill and two rhinos. Just because it gives you speed, and I think lots of people don't like empty rhinos; they think they're useless.
But they're not.
Disagree.
Yeah, they're really good. Yeah.
They
Yeah.
absorb Overwatch, they absorb shooting, they can sit on objective, they can be annoying, they can move block. At Nottingham a couple of weeks ago, last week, it was only last week. I charged many things with my rhinos and killed many things with my rhinos, including many.
And with the blood tide, you're more likely to kill even more of it.
Well, exactly. And so
yeah,
like,
so like I think the Rhino is going to be valid. When the Forge World FAQ comes out, obviously drills and drop pods are extremely valid, valid. But we're not there yet.
I think so. Rhinos as well. A lot will, or not a lot. Some will rest on if we get free equipment on them, because obviously we've seen the Chaos Space Marines do now. In our leaked points list, which came out before the date slate, we don't.
We did not.
Munitorum field manual thing.
But that could just be dated.
That could be dated. In which case, free equipment makes them very interesting. Free melter, free havoc launchers, yes please. In an army that doesn't have that much shooting.
Yep.
So I'd be down for that. When Forge World comes out, as you say, drop pods and drills back on the menu. This might be heresy for this channel. I'm going off drills just because they are very expensive, and I think it's not necessarily that we have better choices now. It's that toughness 8 isn't as valuable as it used to be. The combat is great when they make it in, but it's not. It's 4 attacks. Like, it's not amazing. It's very swingy.
Well, with the blood tithe.
Yeah, but so
no, I know. I don't think you've ever really been a big proponent of drills in the first place, though.
I've run them. Like, they've done work for me. I've enjoyed what they do, what they offer as a means for getting OBSEC in the backfield, that kind of thing. And the times their combat has popped off has been great. I've one-shot big nights with it before. But I think there are too many points to sink into, as you have said, what's going to be quite an elite army.
Fair. Yeah, fair.
So in terms of Forge World, I am leaning more towards the drop pod, just partly for that jackal play, partly maybe for like a turn one wave, pressure wave.
My
Like
my
have
my point with
berserkers
the
coming
drop
out.
pod is that like so what I really like about it is that it doesn't have to be a jackal play. If
Yeah,
your list has a big squad of jackals and a big squad of berserkers, it
you
can
can
be
keep them
either.
guessing. It could be either.
Yeah, like because if you play into knights, you probably want to put berserkers in it because they'll take out a baby knight in turn one if they get that drop
Yeah,
pod in. Or if you're playing custodes, having berserkers in the custodes lines in turn one is
they're actually
insane.
gonna kill custodians rather than
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
jackals,
yeah.
which probably works.
So
So
like, so in my mind, like my ideal mind, when all those things become legal, is I'll have a drill and a drop pod, which like the squads can
but
change between them.
that's 300 points though for just those
Yeah, I'm
two.
fine with
Not
that.
even the cargo.
I know, I'm so fine with that.
But
Like,
like my point is that's 300 points. A max squad of berserkers is another 220, 230, and then jackals another
hmm
75. So that's 600 points for 4 units,
hmm
which is it feels a lot.
I
But
think you'll get the mileage out of it, but it remains to be seen. Like,
yeah,
you can kind of look at all those things and say that's a lot of points for X, Y, and Z, but if it gets 10 berserkers safely into combat, I'm pretty okay with that.
but does it though? Because the 3d6 charge out of deep strike is still 50%, right? Or 54% or something. That's
No,
slightly less.
I think it's higher than that because it'll by the time the drill is coming in, you'll have the +1 charge
I
buff up.
guess. Yeah, I guess.
So
Which might
it's
bump it
I
up
think
into.
it's like 80% or something like that.
Okay.
And then you factor in a reroll because you reroll the three
Yes,
dice.
of course. No,
So
of course. Yeah. So
I
it
like
goes up to like 87, right? We did the math
yeah,
on
I
this. Yeah.
played the Bloodletter Bomb in 8th edition for maybe half the edition, which was the same 3d6
It's,
+1, and I failed the charge once in all the
okay.
tournaments I went
Yeah,
to,
that's
so
fair.
I think it's okay.
It is
And that was back when the reroll was only one of the three dice, not all of them. So it's a little bit, it's good.
yeah.
I think there's like the transport question is going to be really down to kind of whatever you're feeling, how many points you're willing to spend on those transports. But I think where it gets really interesting, or where we might see the personalization of this, is the transports to a point, but more kind of what you're padding out around the list, right? Because obviously it's not just your HQs and your berserkers and what the berserkers are in. It's what you bring to support them
Yeah.
and do potentially the heavy lifting and stuff as well. So one thing I'm really hype on again when it becomes legal is blood slaughters because they're cheap. They're going to be points when they're generated. They benefit from pretty much every single aspect of the blood tithe when it's up. Feeling pains in them is really good. They're super fast, so they can actually be part of your wave too. If you're running Angron, they're going to take the heat off him, or he'll take the heat off them. Either way, your opponent can't shoot all of them all at once, and whichever one he doesn't shoot is probably getting hit in the next turn. They have a neat little charge bonus if it works, but it's not something to build around.
Yeah.
And they got a points reduction. So I think they're really good. Predators aren't bad as well, as we've kind of alluded to. Hellbrutes aren't terrible either at 105 points. So
Hellbrutes, I think, ride or die on if we get free war gear on them. Because if we
yeah,
have to pay for the
100%.
upgrades like we have had to in the past, I think they're still not very good. Because like 105 for like a multi-motor power scourge is great, but like 120 for the same thing is
It's not. It's just not as good.
It tips the balance, doesn't it, a bit?
So I think it's really interesting to build around options. I know there's obviously the talk of the 8 band. It's kind of hard to speculate on them. I think right now.
Yeah, I think it really depends on defensive capability. Obviously, their 9-inch move, we reckon, just based on did they move? Yeah, they did move in the battle war. 9-inch move like possessed. They're gonna be killier than possessed, but you would expect that because they're rumored to be 40 points a model. Exalted are rumored to be 45 points a model, 135 for 3. And like they need to do half again as much work as possessed are currently doing, which is
which I don't see them doing. Yeah, and I just don't think we know enough about them to really necessarily kind of come to a final decision on them yet. But they could be something that could kind of pad around the berserkers and stuff as like a possible support unit. But
they will blend stuff. Like their profile, if they make it into combat, will do hard work against like potentially harder targets than berserkers can handle. Mind you, as you said, the Bloodslaughter also like hits that damage 3 point, which we don't have in abundance. So
and we'll have a lot of attacks at good strength, potentially a little charge buff in there, potentially having the enemy's movement is on a nice little demon engine chassis as well, which isn't terrible. Super fast when it wants to be. Like it can really get up the board. I think it advances flat
It's flat
6.
6, yeah, and it's base
Yeah.
move 10, I think, so it's 16 inches, which is pretty good.
I think it's base move
I
12, I'm
think
pretty
it's 10.
sure.
I looked it up the other day. I think it's 10.
Okay, so it's either moving as fast or a little bit faster than Angron, which is pretty decent
Yeah.
in your first turn because you are advancing it. And the Harpoon is assault. So maybe you just like fire it off and it like have someone's movement in the next turn. Who knows? Like you're never getting a turn one charge with a Blood Slaughter. Like you're not. In the same way that most of the time you're not getting a turn one charge with Angron. But they're fast enough to be in a fantastic position for your wave 2, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
So they're the demon engine in my mind that really suits the army because they kind of keep up with the pace of it, and in a pressure build like the one that we're talking about, they just slot so nicely in. And for 120 points, like they are the definition of a distraction carnifex. If it dies, you just don't really care.
I would also chuck Orleans out as an idea. There are 150 points with the lashes. I played against someone who had their magma on the melter gun things that are assault as well. They move quite fast. They've got D3 plus 3 damage fists, which is pretty big.
I think they also ignore modifiers to move. Siege scrollers.
Charging, I think,
yeah.
So like, they're worth looking at. 140 points without the tendrils, or 150 with, and they are big boys. So
I just think
that it comes. Slaughters probably do the job better.
That's my problem. It's not an and, it's an or. And when it comes down to an or, I'm always going to choose the Slaughter because it's cheaper, doesn't degrade.
Yeah.
It kind of hits as hard. I know the Mauler's a bit harder hitting, but like at the end of the day, there's not that many things that the Mauler's killing that the Slaughter isn't. In my opinion.
I would maybe disagree with that. I think the Slaughter doesn't necessarily reliably kill a baby knight, whereas I think the Mauler probably does.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair. I was more thinking like a Rhino kind of equivalence or something like that. But it's just too much of a point differential in an army that's already going to be scraping for points. I think. Not that I think the Mauler is bad. I do think it's still like if you have a Mauler Fiend and you're like, I'm not really sure I necessarily want to buy a Blood Slaughter, you'll be fine with the Mauler Fiend. It'll be okay. I just think that the most efficient choice in terms of the distraction carnifex kind of support engine role is going to be the Slaughter, just because it's faster, and you care less when it dies. Really, is the main thing.
I'd agree with that probably. I just wanted to, I guess, chuck it out as an option.
It is, and there are other options in terms of the distraction carnifexes, like Hellbrutes, Contemptors, Leviathans, maybe.
And then obviously you mentioned Predators. It'd be interesting to see if we get slightly cheaper Predators with the same profile, because we're not going to have Wanton Destruction for the Exploding Sixes.
Yeah, this is an interesting point. I think a lot of people are a little bit too obsessed with building gun support into world leader lists, and I don't really think that the new book needs it at all.
I disagree.
Yeah, I disagree with your disagreement. My personal take is like people are like, oh, I need to have some shooting, and I'm kind of like, do you though? I've played my current list for a long time, which has no guns, and I'm like, it's fine, you get away with it. I just don't really see the need for shooting because like our army has so many abilities that proc off in combat, and some platforms just don't take advantage of that.
So my thinking is we can go a long way with just melee, for sure, and the access to a relatively cheap fight on death strat for most of our units helps that, because the traditional vulnerabilities are what fight last and like
always
interrupts and stuff like that. Yeah, basically stuff that manipulates the fight phase order. Fight on death, easy access to fight on death that we declare when we're targeted with an attack is great. Like that's really strong as a counter to that. However, maybe it's just like PTSD from playing Space Wolves too much, who have like 3, 4, or at one point had 3 or 4 sources of fights last in their army, and then also like Emperor's Children I played a couple of times who just have army-wide fight first. Maybe it's maybe it's a reaction to that, but I just coming into those matchups, it does just sometimes feel like you just can't do anything, because like you're best in the combat phase and they're not terrible in the combat phase, and also they can manipulate the combat phase. And we can't we can still, as I say, the fight on death is a really nice counter to that, but I think you'd have to be very careful and very thinky about about when you commit when and where you commit stuff.
Yeah, but that's just kind of going back to the pressure build, in my opinion. It's
Yes,
like knowing
but
when to bring certain elements in.
I would argue that taking a little bit of shooting, a little bit of efficient shooting, would be a really great way to just make your life easier.
I don't disagree. I think there is something to be said for that. Like,
Yeah.
it's fine. My problem is we have actually, I was about to say we have so little ways of buffing shooting. We have zero ways of buffing shooting.
Yeah.
Like, you bring in something like Predator, which isn't bad. It's like 140 points, right?
For
And hopefully,
yeah.
hopefully the sponsons will be free, like they are for whatever. But yeah, whatever. You bring that in, and cool. It's just there. Like, there's no rerolls for it. It's still just two las cannons, which swing invariably.
Yeah.
Like, there isn't really fantastic options for shooting platforms, and like I don't think the Predator is terrible. I think there's one in my list, because it's like, it's toughness 8, and you can give it a feel and pain with blood type, whatever, great. But like if you want things with like two las cannons or something, I'm like, well, Hellbrutes have a Scourge and they can rock up the board and take advantage of everything else and still have those las cannons. And the great thing is, maybe we retain that stratagem where we can fire where they get shot, because you know better than anyone else, Jack, how powerful that stratagem is.
Yeah.
But I just, like, I don't personally see a need to lean to take so many points out of my army, which could be other combat elements for guns. Like, if I'm going to do it, it's maximum 200 points is all I would dedicate to actual guns.
You kind of want, if you can, some duality in there as well. So like a Hellbrute that can also like boogie in combat as well, right?
Yeah, it feels a lot less bad when it's a Hellbrute or a drill or something where it's like, not that the shooting is incidental, but it's like shoot.
It's not the main reason you take it.
Yeah, it's like the way I'm like, I love drills because it's 5 meltagons on Volkite, which is really good shooting, but it's also a transport and as combat. Or Hellbrutes, which have 9 attacks at strength 8, AP2, damage 2 in the charge. And our Dreadnoughts as well, which is just good because they're core, so they benefit from everything. But like, bringing in elements like a Predator, I'm like, yeah, on paper, not bad, but like, this could be any Predator in any army. Yeah. It's not necessarily doing tons for the world leaders, which kind of where I fall with it.
I would also say that I feel like strat reserving heavy vehicles or heavier vehicles doesn't feel as bad now, because for me it was always, in the Chaos Space Marine book at least, it was always, but strat reserving a vehicle with heavy weapons means you lose the only buff you give to them, which is the exploding 6 in the first turn. Yeah. And now we don't have that, or probably don't, or almost certainly do not have that. Strat reserving them turn 1 to protect them a little bit doesn't feel as bad, and it means you can possibly draw a better line on whatever you want to shoot with them. So if you view them as like a one-shot wonder and then 2 blood type points when they die on the clapback,
it's less of a bad vibe. So that's why I have one Predator in my list, because I'm like, probably every game I strat reserve it.
And then it pops out on the flank and draws a line on something with its 48-inch las cannons and hopefully blap something. But it's 2 shots, so it's we'll see. But
it's whatever, yeah. Like, I'm like, if you really want the guns, like if you are really like, I have to have the guns in my army, bring a Lord of Skulls, because that thing looks pretty tasty now, and its guns are really good, like really, really tasty profiles. And it also has a fantastic combat. It's hard to kill. 6-up shrug. All the other lovely advantages of being a blood type unit. And if you're allying in demons, which I know some people will, it's a warp locus.
The only thing about the Lord of Skulls is if you're also taking Angron, that's nearly half your army in 2 models.
Yes, it is. However, like, pretty Chad move to bring both those models.
And some armies can one round a Lord of Skulls.
But can they one round Angron as well? And the Lord of Skulls can just fire into strategic reserves if you are worried about an army that can one round one.
True. I guess. I mean, and I ran. I'm trying to remember what my other matchups were. I did run a Lord of Skulls recently, actually, at a tournament, with not the best player place terrain, which meant that he was basically getting shot if people wanted to shoot him. And I think the only army, and he didn't even properly one round it. The only army that nearly one rounded it was the Emperor's Children with all the Blastmasters in the world. Like 8 Blastmasters, how many? 6 Blastmasters? 6, I think? I don't fucking know. Loads of Blastmasters, like the damage 4 Blastmasters. And the only reason he didn't one round it was because I rolled a little bit on saves and he played the -1 damage strat, which we may not get, I guess, which may impact his viability, but
but then it's like you have the 6-up shrug potentially, which kind of counters that,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah, I
like,
guess, yeah.
I just think the Lord of the Skulls, like if you, this is what I'm saying, if you really want the
God,
guns,
God
put them in.
damn you. Now I'm thinking about Lord of Skulls.
Oh, well, like I don't
Sake.
think so. Like I know the Lord of Skulls has like kind of gone in and out of popularity. I've never used one because I just really hate the model. But if like it's never been better in my opinion to run the
Mm,
Lord of Skulls. I think it's really good now.
yeah.
Like especially when you consider that like Angron can give it some of his buffs and things like that. Like it's really good, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, that's fair. Okay.
And it benefits from being in our detachment because of arcs now. It's same goes
And
for any of the other
yeah,
Lords of War. Like if you want to discount Lord of Skulls, the Khitan looks really good now
but
as well,
the
and has good shooting.
the
But
other the
whatever.
other the other early benefit for Lord of Skulls is that he is likely to be in the Codex and therefore not subject to Forge World FAQ bullshit.
Yeah, yeah,
So you can
exactly,
run him early.
exactly.
Um,
And like being a Warp Locus, if you are bringing those demons,
yeah, that's handy too.
there you go.
I think.
Yeah,
Okay, so we've talked about like the bread and butter of the army. We've talked about maybe add-ons, so like the killy stuff that we want to add to it to like just complement the berserkers. Do we need to talk about blood type battery? I think we a
I
lot of
think
it's
we need to
passive.
touch on it. Yeah,
I
I
think
think
I
because a
think
lot of people are talking about this, right?
I think we
And
can touch on
I
it
have pretty strong feelings, which I think go
yeah
against the grain. But
because yeah
why don't you explain what the blood type battery is? Because maybe
so
people aren't so familiar with it.
so there has obviously been talks about the most efficient way to generate blood type, which is basically which is the cheapest units we can put in that will die relatively easily and give us blood type points early doors, while hopefully not being completely useless. Obviously, we talked about Jackals, early trading unit. You can get a squad of 10, so as the min squad size for 70. If you want to take the icon, that's 75. If you want to add some other stuff, they grow in points, but like 70 points for them. Obviously, a lot of people have seized on Spawn because you can take them in a squad of 1 for 25 points, and that gets you a blood type point, as far as we know. I think I know what you're about to say, but a staple for a lot of the like speculative lists that people have been writing has been three lots of one spawn that they can run out onto like mid objectives nice and early, and then the opponent has to make a decision between shooting them off objectives and giving you blood type points and probably blood god stew points as well, um, versus leaving you on there and getting you primary. But I believe you're about to advocate for bigger squads of spawn, so off you
Yeah,
go.
I just think the problem with the 3 single spawn is like you just walk 2 guys on the objective if you're the opponent. You just don't do anything about the spawn. You just like put them there.
so,
It's like cool.
but then that
What now?
if you know that a good opponent is going to do that, then that's where you've got stuff staging for the counter charge, right?
You do.
Because it forces
But
them to walk onto the objective for you to then
yeah.
counter charge, get an extra turn, well, get a turn of Blood God's Due, and also flip an objective and all of that good
Mm.
stuff, and get
It
it onto
does
their units. So
it does line those things up. But I just think like it's just not that good because then you're leaving yourself open to being countered by like their potential
their
lineup of a
counter.
counter, right? I'm just thinking like how it goes with like say like sisters, right? So it's like you put the spawn on the objective and they run up like a novitiate squad,
Mm.
like 5, 10 models, whatever. So then they have the objective back. So you're like, oh cool, now I can run my counter out with like the berserkers or whatever. It's like a 5-man squad. They kill the novitiates, and then the sisters player's like, okay, whatever. Here's Repentia. Deal with
Mm.
that, and they just butcher them. And then you're like, oh well, I'm kind of back to the position I was in the first place, where I just don't have anything here. And it's like my point is like, yes, it is nice that a single spawn can get you a blood type point and can jump on objectives, and you have to force that choice. But like, the thing is, right? Your opponent will, if they're smart, they'll just kill them before they get to the objective because like spawn aren't fast enough to run onto midfield objectives turn 1 in most games unless you roll well on your advance
Yeah,
roll.
just roll
I
fine.
know, I know. I
Oh no, you only have to roll like a
no,
2 or 3 in
it's
advance from.
it depends on the objective. I like because like I've run, you know, I when I was at Leeds, I ran a lot of spawn, and
Yeah.
like some of the maps, yeah, you can get them there early doors, and in ideal worlds, like you can get them there in most of the maps. But the problem with the terrain layouts is a lot of the time the spawn, because they're kind of big and clunky models, they can't necessarily fit in the exact ways that get them
Yeah.
lined up with those
Okay. Yeah.
objectives. So it's quite hard to actually run them onto objectives in turn 1, and then you're hoping for good advance rolls or whatever, and they're not going to be core. So like it's not amazing either. Like I don't think spawn are bad. I just think that like if you're gonna run them, you need to incentivize your opponent to actually kill them, because like if you just have a bunch of single spawn, your opponent's like going to be like, all right, I see what you're doing here. I'm just going to ignore them or whatever.
Mm.
And like, at that point, they kind of become a little bit redundant. However, if you have a unit of like 3 or more spawn and you can run them onto a midfield objective, like a big bulky squad, right? Your opponent does actually have to deal with them. Because like if they don't, in the next turn, you can run those spawn into their lines and they're not going to be inconsequential. Like they'll have decent volume of output, stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I've been disappointed by Spawn, like damage output every time they made combat for me.
Yeah, okay, fair. But like with the Blood Tithe, they'll be a bit better and they'll
Yeah,
have more attacks. They have a few more things going for them. They're not going to be amazing, but they're going to be annoying for your opponent, right?
yeah, that's sure.
I just think like people are like jumping on them a little bit too hard. And
I think,
while
yeah,
while they're not a bad battery, they really aren't that bad. And like just having some individual spawn running around is fine. But like you have to keep in mind they're giving your opponent points for no prisoners. Because they're 4 wins each. So they're like, if you're running 3 individual spawn, that's a point and a bit.
point on no
Yeah.
prisoners.
Also, your opponent is going to see 3 individual spawn, and they'll be like, "Cool, I'm going to bring grind."
Grind no prisoners in the same one, so you have to pick between the two.
Okay, yeah, so it's going to be one or the other, right? But like, my God,
No, I get
find
that.
me a unit
Yeah.
that's easier to score grind points on.
Yeah,
Because they can be like, I'm going to give you 3 blood tide points, that's fine, but I'm going to kill those 3 spawn in one turn, no problem, and that's going to give me grind points,
but
easy.
yeah, but if they were on separate objectives, then you get some of those points back for Blood God's Due. So
Yeah, I just
I know people are jumping on them quite hard, and I'd agree maybe too hard, but I think and it's not going to be.
I just think people think it's a lot easier than it actually is to run spawn onto 3 objectives.
That's
It's
what
not.
yeah.
There's like some okay, Data Scry Salvage, 3 individual spawn will be insane. Like that will be pretty good because you can deploy them all in the line and they can just yeehaw forward onto the. But like if you look at some of the other missions that have like a lot of objectives clustered in the middle and you're starting on like Dawn of War or Hammer and Anvil, you're not going to get those spawn there.
I think I'm not sure you've necessarily changed my mind on it, but I agree there is way more nuance than people are necessarily like acknowledging at the moment. I think for me,
they're like okay, so sorry.
Just
to summarize, I'm not saying they're bad. I'm not saying they're bad. I just don't think their cut and paste will get you blood tide points and victory points in every game. Like I have spawn in my list. I'm running, I think 6, and I can't remember if it's 3 squads of 2 or 2 squads of 3. It's some order of that, and I think that there's probably more to say for something like that as opposed to, oh, here are the spawn running around by themselves because you're like you're open to so much things going wrong in that situation. But however, that's just my own personal thoughts on that.
So there's 2 opposing viewpoints on spawn then, and so I think we've talked quite a lot about potential lists and like we've talked about HQs. I think list building is going to unfortunately. Well, I guess Angron isn't an HQ, but you know what I mean. Like list building is going to start there.
It's a HQ in our hearts, basically.
List building is going to start there with that decision, and then troops. I think we're going to see a fairly standardized some jackals and then loads of berserkers. Whether it's 10 jackals or 20, and then I think minimum 20 berserkers, which is going to be an adjustment for me because I've run 10 for the last quite a while. Only 10, so 2 squads 5. And then I think the most divergence we're going to see, aside from Angron or no, is going to be what you use around that to actually kill stuff. Yeah, to actually kill stuff. Because berserkers are they're good troops. They're killy troops considering they're troops, but they're not that killy anymore. And I think, even with blood type and stuff, and I think we're going to need stuff to do the heavy lifting, whether that is Angron or our HQs, which I feel like it might be, or the padding, as you've been saying. And then we talked a little bit about blood type batteries, so Spawn, Jackals probably the easiest examples.
Rapier carriers as well, pretty good.
Rapier carriers is pretty funny because they are vehicles, so they do score 2 blood type points.
Just put 2 in strat reserve and have 1 pop up every turn.
And I mean, heavy bolters ain't nothing anymore. So
nope.
That is worth a look as well. Obviously subject to Forge World FAQ stuff, but definitely worth a look. We haven't talked about flyers, but I don't think we should because I think they're overcosted and we only have 2 slots to take them, and I don't think it's worth it.
With the new rules on flyers having to start in reserve, the Helldrake is dead.
Yep.
which is sad, but that's just where it is.
Sad, but it means I don't have to paint
I mean,
it, so
like
it's
it actually kills all the flyers effectively.
I think so.
but-
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
it's sad, but it means I don't have to paint it, so that's good.
It's a pity because you know what would have been if the flyer rules were as they were. I actually think Hellblades would have been really good in the. No, they would have been. They would have been. They're cheap and blood tide points, and I think they would have been good. You know I'm right.
We're done now. We're done. Nearly an hour long. We're done. We're not talking about fucking Hellblades. So.
All right, everyone. I think that's pretty succinct way to close it out. But yeah, I think we're both in agreement that the pressure cooker is the build.
I think successive waves of pressure, trading, MSU or not, but trading is going to be how well we trade.
How well we trade and the value of our trades in terms of the blood tide abilities that kind of stem after it.
I think probably means World Eaters results are going to be tied a lot to player skill.
Which is awesome.
Which is great. Not a point.
It's exactly what we want.
It might have been at one point.
Yep.
So.
It will entice loads of new players in, but I will still reign supreme at the top.
When have you ever been at the top?
In my dreams.
Okay.
If you haven't already, though, subscribe to the channel for more fantastic content from myself, Jack, and Jamie about all the wonderful new World Leader stuff and how things are going to change moving forward. I can't wait for our opinions to change this time next week, probably. But yeah, it's awesome. So hang out with us here. If you really like us and want to support us, we have a Patreon, which you can sub to. And if you want to be part of the widespread discussion amongst ourselves and everyone else, there is a Discord. The link is in the description. So support us in however way you feel right and just. I hope this has been a fun video for everyone. So from myself and Jack and the rest of the team, stay healthy, stay safe, and kill Mimber.